Hello and welcome to the Struggles to Success podcast, the podcast that helps you use struggles to become better, stronger, and more successful. I am Dr. Emmanuel, the host of this podcast, and you're all very welcome. I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest today, and it's Professor Ged Williams. Professor Ged Williams is Chief Nurse Officer and Executive Director of Nursing at Alfred Health, Melbourne, Australia. He has served as Chief Nursing Officer for over 8 organizations. He is founding chair and past president of the World Federation of Critical Care Nurses. He's also founding president of the Australian College of Critical Care Nurses and was former director of the World Federation of Societies of Intensive Care and Critical Care Medicine. Ged also worked in Abu Dhabi, where I work at the moment. He was chief nursing officer for 3 hospitals, and I had the pleasure of working with him in Mafraq Hospital. The help found the African Federation of Critical Care Nurses and also the African Sepsis Alliance, which I chair. And I have the honor and pleasure of also working with him as he was a former executive of the African Sepsis Alliance. And so it's a real pleasure to welcome Ged to this podcast. Now, struggles are gifts. And in this podcast, we answer a number of questions. How can you make the most of a crisis? How can you use the struggles that are part of daily life to become better and more successful? Is it possible for you to emerge from your darkest moments to a better and brighter future for yourself and the people around you? And that is what great people and great teams do. And so Ged, you would see Ged, and I've introduced him, and you see how successful he is, but I'm sure he has had struggles on the way that have led him to success. And so, Ged, you're very welcome to this podcast.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Good to be here.
So I'll start by asking you to tell us your story. How did you get to where you are now? Was it easy? What were your struggles along the way?
Wow. So it's interesting. This week I turned 60. So I've got a lot to reflect on.
Happy birthday in advance.
But it starts when you're young. You start off life and you get given your lot. And sometimes that's great and sometimes it's not so good. So my lot was I was born into a relatively poor family, not super poor, but my parents finished school when they were about 15 and just went into the normal sort of apprentice type task roles that people did back in those days. They came from quite fundamentalist Catholic families, so you can assume the sort of values and behaviours that are associated with that lifestyle. So that that was a strong influence on me because I was sent to Catholic school, particularly high school. But as a young person, I was the oldest of 6 children. Mum and Dad had 6 children very quickly, within less than 8 years. They were good Catholics. Right. So being the oldest, I think, there were struggles there. There was challenges and responsibilities and difficulties. And we lived on quite an isolated farm. We went to a small country school with just one teacher and 14 students. So for most of our upbringing, we were the biggest provider of students to that school to keep it alive. And I do remember one story that my late brother used to tell me about me. And he used to say he felt sorry for me because when we were growing up, the whole school would go to a swimming pool about 9 kilometres or so from the school. And we would do swimming classes with the kids from the other very small schools in the region. So we would all go to this one swimming pool and we would learn how to swim, etc. And I had 3 younger brothers, and so I had to help them get undressed and dressed. Because I was only about 9 and the youngest was 5, and this was a 5-year-old telling me as an adult many years later that he remembers how I used to have to stay back and help him because he was the last to get ready and look after him. When all my other friends were playing and having fun and being silly and whatever, I was the one who had to be responsible. So I don't see that as a struggle, but others saw it as, being challenging, being difficult, or being the one left out of opportunities. So a lot of my journey has been not necessarily perceived as struggles, but just what life dishes out. It is what it is, and you just have to get on and do your task, do your job. So that's some of my recollections of the young Ged.
That's right. And do you
the,
think
the
that?
struggles later, go on.
Yeah, I was wondering whether that made you, at a young age, sort of more responsible, having to help your junior siblings.
I think so. I think, as I moved into high school as well, I just seemed to take on responsibilities. If people asked me to do something, I would dutifully see it as my role to just do the job. And so I ended up in roles, like a school prefect. And, I remember in year 12, my last year of high school, I had a knee injury, so I couldn't continue to play football. And I was devastated by that because I considered myself a pretty good footballer. We have a different code of football in Australia as well. We have our own code, Australian rules football, and that was the code I played. And I had to have a knee operation at the beginning of the season, so I couldn't play. But one of the senior coaches then asked me to coach the under 14 team because they didn't have any of the teachers available to teach that team. And so I took on that responsibility, and they were quite a successful team. It was a fantastic opportunity. But I think it was about that time in my journey in life, 16 or 17, where I started to realize that I am someone, a little bit different to my colleagues. I do, or my friends, I do take responsibilities just a little bit more seriously, or I say yes more often than no when a challenge or a responsibility comes my way. And, they are sometimes struggles as well as being opportunities. And so you take them on as an opportunity, not necessarily as a struggle, and you do what you can. And like many things I've found in life, and I'm sure you're the same, Emmanuel, no matter how hard the job is, the more you apply yourself to it, generally the better it'll be. I mean, you can be unlucky in life, but you can be really lucky in life as well. And I think by, applying yourself to these challenges, you find luck, or luck finds you, and it helps you overcome that hurdle until you get to the next one.
Absolutely. I can identify with what you just said because I'm also the eldest in the family. So I also had responsibility at a young age. And I think that also helps to give you focus, but also it makes you work hard because you have to help the others. And for others, it would seem like a struggle, but it's also it's a responsibility at a young age, which also defines how you also do things as you grow older. But I also was interested in what you said about not seeing as a struggle. It's really an opportunity. But some people see it as a real difficulty and won't use it in their favor. And people do it naturally, as you described. But some people also learn it with time. And one of the things I say in the book I published, From Struggles to Success, is it's a skill that you can learn, and the more you do it, then the better you become. and the more you see opportunity, you see struggles as opportunities rather than just problems. And you seem like somebody who naturally also is drawn to a crisis or a problem, like what you just described in your early life.
Yeah. Well, what you just said then just resonated with me. So one of my struggles as a human being is just my genotype or my personality type. I'm a really shy person. Well, I was extremely shy,
I
and
think that was maybe accurate. You don't look like a shy person now.
let me tell you that journey. I mean, that's been an amazing journey because not only was I shy, I just didn't have confidence, and as a younger person, and when I used to do those Myers-Briggs scoring systems, those processes to understand your personality and talk to an expert in the area. And yep, definitely always an introvert, always a nerdy sort of person. But what I did, how I describe who I am now, because I often get asked to talk about leadership and those types of things, is I describe myself as an introvert who is a learned extrovert. And I've used that expression for about 30 years because it's
Wow.
been in the last 30 years where I've had to, like you, stand in front of very big audiences and very important people and have to put forward points of view. And that can be incredibly intimidating and threatening. But then in the moment, I've learned how to put aside those emotional responses that you might get and learn how to perform in the moment. And the more you perform in the moment, it becomes less of a performance as you get better at it. It becomes the new you in that context. But as soon as I'm out of that context, I'm really happy to be alone and be back of house and be in my comfort zone, which is just me and my thoughts and maybe a few close friends.
Interesting. And so
So I think
turning a
that's
struggle into
part of,
success is part
yeah,
of.
yeah. And it's also contextualizing your life. Your life isn't the same all the way through. There's moments where you have to step up or where you have to be someone you don't want to be. And then there are other times in life where you can just sail along normally, you're in your comfort zone and everything's good. But I think those of us like yourself and me and our colleagues who choose to take on bigger challenges or bigger roles that might even be beyond us, we choose to step up, we choose to take on that challenge, and we choose to transform ourselves to fit the role that we're required to fit in that circumstance.
That's interesting. Really important point there about stepping out of your comfort zone. And if the more you step out of your comfort zone, the more you learn that skill. And certainly from my experience of crisis, each time I've gone into a crisis, reluctantly often, it's really made me a better person and the team a better team at the end of it. A good example is COVID. The COVID response, for example, in our hospital, really helped us gel as a new team in the hospital in Sheikh Shagbot Medical City. It also helped build the department and between the working relationship between ourselves. It helps us self-discover and we develop skills that we didn't know we had or we could develop. So, and that was an example of a crisis and us stepping up that actually put us in a much better place after the crisis.
Yeah, well, my thoughts on crises is they usually do bring people together, because you have to. And you then have a shared goal and a shared purpose. And the survival of everyone depends on cooperation. The challenge I've found in leadership roles is when you're not in a crisis and people revert back to their own instinctual behaviour of looking after themselves and trying to move away people that they prefer not to have on their team and those behaviours. And I think when I was reflecting on coming onto this show, based on my experience, so I've got no evidence for this, but based on my experience, the physical crises or the work crises and even some of the family crises um, are not anywhere near as difficult for many people as the existential, what I would call the existential crises or struggles in life. And they're the bigger questions about, well, why am I here? What is my purpose? What should I pursue? And what legacy should I leave? And some people who, sadly, would love to have an answer to any of those questions and don't. And they just live out their life without pursuing what purpose they could have pursued. And I think that's a struggle for a lot more people. And I think, situations like depression and self-loathing and those sort of things, part of it's genetic. I'm sure we don't know enough about the mind yet to answer these questions. And I am by no means an expert, but based on my experience, that is the biggest struggle in life, is to know your purpose and to meaningfully pursue that and make it work for yourself or for those people that you want to help find a better life for themselves. So that's the tricky one, is the existential struggle. Why are we here? What's my purpose? And am I doing what I ought to be doing? Or am I actually doing what I'm capable of doing? Am I really stretching myself to deliver in this life that we have? And by doing so, then having, all the things that flow from that, which is, self-respect and a sense of achievement and a sense of purpose. They're really meaningful, important things in life, I believe. And I also believe maybe for many people, it's why they do struggle with life, is because they haven't really worked that one out. It takes a while for some people. For others, they're lucky, sometimes their purpose in life is given to them. You're born to be the king of the country, for instance. So your purpose is clear from the day you're conceived. Whereas the rest of us, we have to find that, and that can be a struggle.
That's very profound. You said a number of things. You said a lot of things there. The first, which I want to just talk about a bit more, is that sometimes after a crisis, people forget what happened before and go back to status quo. And that also has to do with when you're going through a struggle. You have to keep reminding yourself that you're trying to do something different and reminding yourself of where you came from and where you need to be, so that you don't go back to the usual ways. And that's really an important point you've raised. The other profound point is purpose. And in my experience, often your crisis or even struggles can help you find your purpose. In my book, I tell the story of losing a close friend, Delphine, from sepsis. And that was a major crisis in my life. And at that point, I didn't know where it would take me, but it's taken me and yourself and colleagues to develop the African Sepsis Alliance, and now doing a lot of work to improve sepsis recognition and management in Africa and saving lives in Africa. So that led me also to find my purpose. And this podcast we're having about struggles to success also originated from that. So it's actually that struggle that has given for me my purpose. And if you use your struggles well and reflect on them, you would often realize that you can take you to your purpose. I mean, Nelson Mandela is is an example, and the legacy he's left in South Africa and stopping apartheid. He also had a major struggle. It took him to prison for 27 years in South Africa, but that led him to his purpose. And you mentioned also about the queen, the king or queen. You may be born with your purpose. You may not like that purpose, and you may find a different purpose. And some royalties have decided to leave the throne and find a different purpose.
That's true. Mm.
So how did
Yeah.
it?
So
How did crisis or struggles help you find your purpose? I know you're a philanthropist. You do a lot of work out of Australia, internationally, and specifically in Africa. In Cameroon, where I'm from, and the African Federation of Critical Care Nurses. You do a lot of work in Asia and other parts of the world. So, based on the question or this topic you just raised, what is your purpose, and how did struggles help you find your purpose?
That journey's been an interesting one. So this is the work I do in my own time. I don't get paid for this work. So it has to be important because of the sacrifices you make. You use up your own money and your own time and your own energy, and occasionally put yourself at risk to do these things. That journey started as a young boy as well. So I said before, I was brought up in this fundamentalist Catholic environment, which I don't belong to anymore. I respect it, but it's not my choice to belong to a religion. But I am quite a spiritual person, and quite a reflective person, but I wouldn't call myself religious at all anymore. But what I learned from the religious people who taught me, they were incredibly giving people. They had devoted their life to their purpose, which was often teachers, priests and brothers and nuns. And I used to listen to their stories, of where they went in the world and to the missions and the work they did. And I was quite inspired by that lifestyle of just being able to give freely to people and see the difference you made in their lives. And what I've learned on that journey is it's not just giving, it's actually empowering. So giving empowerment, not giving resources, but helping people to use the resources they've got to fulfill a purpose, whether that's to build a hospital or to develop a training program or to put skills into people's hands that they can continue to pass on to others. Why did I make that a purpose? Well, I saw a need, I saw a gap. So after I formed the Australian College of Critical Care Nurses, and that was a struggle because Australia has a number of different states, and the states had their own types of individualised critical care networks. And I proposed that we collapse them all into one national college. So that meant that people had to give up their power in their little province and collaborate and cooperate with a bigger group. So I did that, but then concurrently I was aware that there were many countries in the world that didn't have the same opportunities as me to be able to get a really good education and advanced skills in critical care that could be so beneficial. And so I just had this idea that maybe we needed a world federation of critical care nurses, and then we could help those countries and people in those countries that didn't have such networks and opportunities to share what we had, and then hopefully help them build their own. And that really has become my purpose for a lot of my life. I mean, there are many other purposes, but they're the ones that people know me for outside of my other purposes, which is my family, my children, my grandchildren, my work, and all those things. But once I started that, it is like being a father, and you might relate to this. Once you have your first child, your purpose changes forever. But it's not the only purpose you have. And so I'm sort of like the father of critical care nursing. Many people call me that. I know it's a bit conceited of me to even share it in this forum, but probably true. So from a critical care nursing point of view, and I've felt an obligation to have to stay with that journey and stay with those people. And to the day I die, I will be that person who helped form that organisation and then continued to mentor all those people in there through their struggles and through our struggles. But the nice thing about that community, it is like a family. When one of us struggles, there are others in the family who are there to help. And then to push that person or to even lead that person or comfort that person during whatever struggle they are, and to help find meaningful solutions to their problems based on experiences and resources that we can pull from other places. So it gets back to that sense of duty, you know, that obligation to, it's like changing my little brother's clothing after the swimming event. You know, it's the same sort of ethos, meaning, purpose, behavior. You're making me reflect on the parallels here. I've never really thought about it like this, but there are incredible parallels that I'm starting to discover just by talking to you.
They are. It always takes a conversation to reflect and also to organize the mind, as they say. You've also mentioned the you can have multiple purposes. So often people think I have one purpose, but there's a purpose with the children or the family, purpose with your job, there's a purpose with what you do out of the job, and for example, the philanthropic work which you do. So it's not often one. People often try and put it in one box, but it's much bigger than that, and you can't. And life isn't like that. And the different times, it changes with time, I guess, as well. At one point when your first child, as you said, is your focus, and that's exactly, I identify with that completely. When we had our first daughter, Kelly, it was all about Kelly, and it changes and evolves when you have more children, etc. So that's really interesting. I also reflected on that when you said that. You also mentioned that you help people, you empower people, and so and I wanted to just ask you a bit about that, because it's like being a coach, and the people you empower are people who are facing struggles, and you come in as a coach to help them. And then I've seen you operate. I've seen the things you've done. So you help them then move on, and then make a change, and then move to a place that is better, stronger, or more successful. So you help them turn their struggles into success. So I wonder, how do you get them to commit to moving? They clearly have had a problem, and maybe for a long time, but they may not have done anything about it. So I'm interested to know your thoughts about how do you get them to bring about the change that they were not doing. You probably maybe didn't give them a lot of resources.
Really good question. And every circumstance is different. You know, the context of every person or every project will always be different. So I'm gonna treat people like objects. It's going to sound like that, but that's not the way it is. But I have projects, and my wife and I, Suzanne, we laugh about this. My projects, and they're usually people. And I would never say that to someone. I would never say, Emmanuel's my project at the moment. But it's sort of like that. I will have an intense relationship with someone for a while to help them get back on track. So or I might have a particular project that I want to get moving. And so the intensity of my time with that will be, quite profound until it starts to be able to take care of itself more and more. And then I spend less time with that project because there's another project that needs more intensity, or I find a new project. And, at any given time, I could have a dozen projects going. They could be individuals who have major crises. I come from a family with a lot of mental health issues and some substance abuse issues. So there are different members of my extended family or my network of friends where some of those individuals, they're quite vulnerable and they need a lot of intense work. So I'll spend a lot of time with them until such time as they've found the resources and the supports they need. And same with my professional work, setting up a new journal, that's been a nightmare, but very important. Our organisation really wanted to sustain that ability to provide a journal that focused on critical care nursing. And so I put my hand up to help do that. But it's slowly now just getting to the point where others are able to contribute, and it's now able to take more of a life of its own without so much work from me. And, when I helped form the African Federation of Critical Care Nurses and the Southeast Asia Federation of Critical Care Nurses and the Latin American Federation of Critical Care Nurses. I even started learning Spanish, and I gave some of my presentations in Spanish so that I could
Wow.
work more closely and more effectively with those people. And now I don't go to Latin America much at all. They've got their own organisation, they've got their own board, they run their own conferences and training programs. They're quite amazing, 15 years later. I think, but you asked the question, which I've avoided, is how do you get them to do that? And I don't get them to do that. I work with them to try and help them frame their own purpose and their own meaning and what their journey will look like. And I'll obviously try and influence it if I think I can make it bigger or stronger or better. But usually they come up with what they want, and then I'm just there as a coach, to provide guidance, encouragement, help them with aspects of their journey that I have skills in. And again, it is not wanting to sound paternalistic, but it is that parenting style of, helping someone who hasn't quite got your experience yet, or hasn't quite had the learning opportunities or the resources that you've got, but they can see how they can learn from what I've got and apply it to their context so that they can have their own journey. But it'll never be the same as my journey. It'll be their own journey, but hopefully I can help them to make their journey the best journey it can be. And I think people, they will do their best for their coach. So that's the other thing. So I have found, by showing interest in their journey, by wanting to be a part of their journey, and wanting to help them, they don't want to disappoint you. So they try a little bit harder because they've got that sort of, they've got that validation from someone they respect. And they don't want to let that person down, as well as not wanting to let themselves down. So you can actually use that. It's almost manipulation if you listen to my words. It sounds like I'm manipulating people. I'm not. I'm trying to help them get the best out of themselves. And that's what a coach does. A coach may manipulate their players, but that's not the purpose. It's not around manipulation. It's around helping them find that little bit extra that they won't be able to find on their own, and then making that achievement.
That sounds like exactly what you're doing there, coaching people to turn around their struggles. I'm interested how they may have had that for a while, not done much about it, but with your help, perhaps, as you say, bringing your skills, asking questions, showing them a different place, or also maybe being inspired by yourself. What you've done also with in Australia or the World Federation of Critical Care Nurses, also inspire them to feel, actually, we can do this. We don't have to just live in despair. As it's been difficult, we can actually turn this around. And then having somebody with experience who has done it to maybe also guide them. Because a bit of difference between coaching and mentoring also, because you're in mentoring, you're giving advice. Maybe in coaching, you're asking questions and listening and just giving them a different perspective rather than giving them directive advice. So really interesting how you've done that. I'm also still goes back to your childhood missionary roots, as because what you do around the world in South America, Asia, and it's some form of missionary work inspired by what you experienced as a child. It's amazing how what we've lived in the past, our past experiences, define what we do in the future, sometimes unconsciously.
It has been very unconscious, but recently I was talking to a few colleagues that I went to school with. So we caught up, we discovered each other, and we're just talking about my journey. And it almost is like I've formed my own church or my own, priesthood or something. But it is a worldwide movement now, which a lot of religions are. But it's based on different principles. It's very humanitarian and it's very professionally focused. But it is a little bit like that. It's ironic almost, isn't it, when you think about it like that,
It
where
is.
you
It is.
finally find yourself after after the journey's not ended, but at this point in the journey.
And
It just made me reflect on another thought. So one of the slides I have when I talk about leadership, I think was from Harry Truman, whose definition of leadership was making people do something they don't want to do and liking it. Now that's the real core of a good leader, because I gave you an example of where I help people do something they want to do. But the tougher challenge as a leader is asking people to do something they don't want to do and then liking it. And I would talk about helping people with a substance dependency. Now, they don't want to stop using the substance, but you help them find a way to stop doing it and then liking that new reality. Yeah, and I think that, and of all the struggles, I've never been a substance dependent person, but I've in our jobs, working in places like this, I'm actually at work at the moment at the Alfred Hospital. You see that struggle that some people have, when they're dependent on something, where they've got an addiction, and trying to help them through that struggle, and then finding a different life that they actually enjoy that they never thought that they would enjoy. That would have to be the ultimate satisfaction in a project to help those sorts of situations, because they are difficult.
Interesting. So with the work that you've been doing in other continents, Asia, Africa, South America, Latin America, tell us about what you see as your major struggle you've had in that aspect of your work, and how you've managed to turn it around.
Yeah. Well, again, they're all different. There's a million stories. You and I probably have more similarity in the African continent, because that's where you and I have worked together, and you're from there. Just trying to form a network of leaders from different countries to work together and to help each other. That for me, that's nearly a 20-year journey. 2006, I first went to Africa and had a bit of a look around and went, spoke at a conference and learned a few things. And then from there, I've been to many countries, but probably not even half yet. I might have been to about a dozen countries in Africa. And they're probably the poorest would have been Liberia. And then the wealthiest, obviously, South Africa, and then a lot in between: Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana. So I've been to quite a few places now and got a good sense of the similarities and differences, and trying to work out how one small person like me can make a difference. And it's very humbling, because it's such a challenging continent. But it's the same principles of everything else I've done. You find those other individuals who have a common interest for the problem or for the purpose that you can see needs an answer. And so for me, that has been around education, training and capacity building of nurses so they can do more in their community. And I feel blessed that I'm a nurse. And the reason for that is that when you train nurses, when you develop nurses, you don't just train a nurse. You train a human being with incredible human skills as well, so that when they're not nursing, when they're in their home or in their community, they bring all that knowledge and training and experience into the community. And so they can deal with family members in crisis. They can deal with the next door neighbour who chops off their finger and provide immediate first aid. They can understand, the challenges of childbirth and sometimes even help in those situations as well. So they become an incredibly important resource, not just for healthcare, but for the whole community. And that's why I like the projects I get involved with, because you can see that what the outcome is so much more than what your primary purpose was. And you can see how that ripple effect into the community happens. And I think the other thing, I don't want to sound controversial, and so I'll put this mildly, but women in our society have had limited opportunities relative to us, and particularly in developing countries where they can't get access to education, so they don't get to see what their opportunities could be or what their future purpose could be. And I find nursing, because it is a female-dominated profession, it's such a great opportunity to give a lot of those young women who don't have great opportunities. This is one opportunity that could really transform their life and transform their community. And so by helping to set up training programs in nursing, and it just so happens that that's the skill I have. So that's why I say I'm blessed, because I didn't purposefully become a nurse to do this, what I'm doing now. I was able to link the two. And so then you find that purpose. It's a new purpose. I didn't realize I could create a purpose of doing something so substantial in Africa. But what we are doing now is very substantial. And it's just been fortuitous that, we can help that bigger social and community agenda, not just the health agenda that we started off doing.
Interesting. And I've been listening attentively, and the listeners to the podcast would have noticed that a number of times I've asked you about struggles and your major struggle and how you've turned to success, and repeatedly you've mentioned opportunities, right. and you've done it again, and that shows it's really profound, because it shows your mindset. It shows your mindset, because you don't see them as problems, you see them as opportunities, and not everybody that has that skill or natural skill to see everything around them as, this is an opportunity, we can do it, rather than, oh, it's a problem, I can't move it. It's each time I've asked you a struggle, you've mentioned opportunities and opportunities. Unconsciously, I can see it unconsciously, because I don't think you've noticed. But well, it's quite a mindset to have, and some people do it naturally and people develop it. It's interesting how I've just watched what I've worked with you, so I know how you work, and it's the same thing. But just listening to your conversation, it's exactly the same. That you very much see everything around you as opportunities and
I think,
and for
thank you
improvement.
for that. I mean, that's a compliment. So, I take that on board. If you think about our journeys, they, and our learning, it is very purposeful to start with, so, what you don't know, then you know what you know, and then can't remember the fourth one, but you get to a point where you don't know what you don't know. No, you don't know what you know. That was the quadrant I was just exploring. And so some of this about me being the opportunist, it has just become innate, but it may not have always been there. But I've learned that on this journey, and now I don't even think about it. It's just subconsciously, that is the way I'm programmed to look at things in my life. It's a bit like that example I gave earlier, where I said, I was an introvert and hopeless introvert, really, really shy and lacking confidence. And now I'm not that person, although I still am deep down, but instinctively I know how to perform the way I'm required to perform. And so it's probably, I now know how to behave the way I'm supposed to behave as a leader, because I've been conditioned so much now that it is natural. And I think, like good athletes, they are conditioned to know how to psych themselves to perform so much better than their body would normally be able to do, because they just do it so often. So I guess I'm like any other expert in life. I've just conditioned myself to become that sort of person that I need to be. So I think for the listeners, and I'm no expert, I'm just telling you what I think. So I heard someone say the other day, opinions are like arseholes, everyone's got one. I just think that by continuous training of yourself, whether you are training to be an athlete or training to be a professor or training to be a leader. It's just by repeatedly always doing the right thing the right way, it becomes natural. And then maybe back to your story about struggles. If you continuously use your framework, like the framework in your book, which is a great book, by the way, by creating that template or that path that each time you hit a struggle, you will use those things that have worked for you before. Sometimes you tweak them a little bit. You will condition yourself to be that new type of person so that future struggles or future challenges will just be easy to overcome because you've conditioned yourself. You've basically prepared yourself and rehearsed for that moment. So when that moment comes, you are better at responding to it. And this is why we do basic life support training and trauma training. We rehearse so that the time that trauma comes in, we all know our places, our stations, and we all know exactly what we need to do to give that person the best opportunity they can have. But we've all done the rehearsal so that we get the best outcome that's needed.
That's exactly.
And I'll give you another example. Like I worked in intensive care for a long time, as a clinician. And this is a really good example of a struggle. So we would have patients come in and, they would be brain dead or badly smashed up or for whatever reason, they're going to die. And what I observed with the families was profoundly influential on the way I think about life, because those families that talked about death with the person who ultimately ended up in the intensive care unit, and they had discussed things around what would happen if I die, or what are my views on organ donation, or how would I like to be buried, or what songs would I like, or who would I like to come to my funeral. People who had had those conversations, when the moment came, they were at ease. They were able to absorb the moment and calmly enjoy it almost. That's probably the wrong word, but they were at peace with it. They were at peace with the situation that we were presenting to them and the inevitability of what was about to happen. But it wasn't a bad experience for them. And particularly if they had the opportunity then to donate the organs because they knew that was the wishes of the person, they could feel so constructive. Coming back to opportunities, they could see an opportunity to do something really constructive. And if we can help guide them in that journey, it's a very easy outcome for everybody. But at the other extreme, there were families who would never speak about it. They would never talk about those issues because they were too hard to even contemplate, let alone talk about. But when the inevitable moment came, they were in pieces. They were crying. They were sometimes even hurting themselves or blaming one another and arguing and fighting and just really decompensating. And they missed the opportunity by not being able to have those conversations that the other families had had, and then not have that opportunity to have a meaningful journey through that struggle. They had a really bad journey. And I would imagine they were the types of people who might have PTSD and, might have, a really negative, lasting negative situation based on that experience because they didn't prepare themselves for it. So I think rehearsal is a really important protector in life's journeys, to rehearse those things that might happen and to contemplate how you would respond when that situation happens so that hopefully you do it better than what others might.
Absolutely. So preparation, and the skill of turning a struggle into success. As I argue, it's a life skill, and the more you do it, the better you become. And also, the earlier you learn it, the more successful the more likely you are to be successful. And I think you're a good example, and you just demonstrated that about starting that early. You use the opportunities because in life there are a lot of struggles in life, and if you keep developing that skill, you may do it unconsciously, but if you also do it consciously, it's like going to the gym. The more weight you lift, the more muscle you also develop. And now interviewing you and looking at all you've done so far, you achieved so far, and just how you operate, is you've learned that skill to quite a high level, like athletes do. And I would argue that that's why you are where you are. And that's how you change things, not only in your current job in Australia, but around the world in the work you do, and how you inspire people to bring about improvements in critical care, nursing, and healthcare around the world, because you've learned that skill and you do it now naturally. While other people may see a problem and break down, and you just find a way. And that's the skill of turning a struggle into success. And that is really what this podcast is about. It's about people sharing their lessons, their experience, and their stories to inspire other people also to learn that skill, and use the opportunities that come their way. Struggles are gifts, and you've demonstrated that in the interview. That all these things you've mentioned and actually gifts. They're not struggles; they're opportunities. They're gifts for you to do something better and become better, stronger, and more successful. And with that, I think we're coming to the end of the podcast, but we have a tradition on the podcast to ask the special guests to have a last word, and perhaps mention, in your experience, if anybody is faced with a struggle in life, what would you say they should do, and what's the one thing you think they should do, and the one thing they should not do? One do and one don't when faced with a struggle, from your
I'll
experience.
do that in a moment, but I do want to share one last thought that has been running around in my head during this conversation, and that is sometimes it's good to fail early in life.
Would you mind coming closer to the microphone and just a bit louder so I can hear?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one thought I've been having, sometimes it's okay to fail, but fail early, and don't get consumed by something that you can't do, or that may not be a good outcome, or that you can't change. So I've got two examples I want to really share with you. The first one is, after starting nursing, I thought I would like to be a doctor. And I applied to get into medicine. I got accepted by Melbourne University, which is quite a prestigious medical school. And I already had a wife and one child. And in the same week that I got the letter to say you've been accepted into medicine, and I only had to do I had to do 5 years, not 6, because I already had my nursing qualifications. My wife told me that we were pregnant with our second child, and that she would have to care for the children, so she wouldn't be able to work. And I thought about it so hard. How was I going to do it? And I chose not to. And I don't regret that decision. The moment I made the decision, I did not dwell on it. I just moved on. So that's the first failure. But it wasn't a failure because other doors opened. Here's me being glass half full again. But yeah, other doors did open, and great things happened. The other one is I've had two younger brothers die, one at the age of 29 and one at the age of 49.
Sorry to hear.
And they were tragic personal experiences. One was bad, but two was even more terrible. And then to see the impact on, my parents in particular. No parent should outlive a child, let alone two. But I consciously just moved on. And I didn't try and bottle it up so it's going to come back and haunt me later. But I just dealt with it in a way, because there are so many other things you have to get on and do in life after a tragedy. And you can't let it paralyze you. Bad things will always happen to us. But if we let them paralyze us, then we're weaker for that. And people that depend on us don't get what they need from us. Because I have a philosophy that we don't own our lives, that everyone else owns our life, and we are a resource to everybody else. So it's very different to how a lot of people think about their life. They believe it's their life and quite self-absorbed with what they want to do. So yeah, I just wanted to share that little thought as well, just about don't let things, failure will always happen, and let it fail if it needs to fail. And don't think that you just have to push on, with something that's just not going to work. And you could talk about, relationships that fail as well. Some relationships are meant to fail, and it's okay, as long as you can still be kind to each other and find a new journey, a new path. It's still okay to fail. So I just want people to know that. And a lot of people, sorry, I'm taking up more of your time now, but I just want to share one other really important message.
Really useful. Really useful.
A lot of people come to me in my role. So I have a lot of people that report to me, and they come to me with some profoundly complex life events and challenges that they have, and they need help and guidance. And it's very interesting that because I've had a lot of trauma and tragedy in my life, that's a gift for me, because when they're talking to me, they might be talking about a child dying or a sibling dying, or, someone in their family who's, severely drug affected or severely mental health issues, whatever the tragedy and struggle is, I can meaningfully empathize with them and share my story. And that is amazing, the response I get from that, because they look at me and they think, hey, you're a guy that's got it all together. You wouldn't have struggles. Now, you wouldn't have the problems I have because you're so successful. And you can use that, your own story, not to discount their story, but just to share the empathy that I know what you're feeling, I know what you're going through, because I've walked that path as well. And then you can say to them, and I'll walk that path with you. And so, that's been profoundly useful for me as a manager and as a leader of people, to have had so many difficulties. And at this point in my life, at 60, you've got more than the average person who's 25 or 30 coming to your office. So you can use that really mindfully. And so I just wanted to share some of those last thoughts, because I thought
That's really useful. And I often say problems are gifts, and I hadn't seen it in that light. And it's it's eye opening what you've just said, because it's a gift in terms of you can use it to make things better, but also you've got the experience of it. And so when you see somebody else in that situation, you know what they're going through, you can empathize, you can also help them, and you can connect with them. And that's what you're saying. And that is really important. You can see where they are at the moment, as we say. You're not just hearing them, you can actually see it because you've been there. Yeah. You've lived it. And that in itself is a blessing. Not everybody, that in itself is a gift. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can do that.
Two questions. I've got to answer them. I've forgotten what they were.
The question was about do and don't when you're faced with a struggle. One do, one don't. One thing you should absolutely not do, and one thing you should do. And you may have already answered it in the last things you just said.
Yeah, I probably haven't. The thing I just said, the thing you should not do is let it consume you if it's beyond your ability to fix. Yeah, because some people...
So have clarity, you mean have clarity in terms of whether you can deal with it, or you can turn it around or move on. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, because sometimes there are struggles, as I said before, that you cannot overcome. They are actually beyond you to fix, like a broken marriage, or some other life tragedy. Someone being killed who's really close to you. So you cannot allow it to overwhelm you or define the person you're going to be, unless, of course, you use it to define you to be a better person. So you've got to keep the glass half full. So that's one thing you shouldn't do. One thing you should do with all struggles is learn from them. See them as an opportunity to learn, and to guide how you might get through this particular struggle, but to use every moment in that as a teachable moment or as a learnable moment for the future.
That's excellent. Thank you. On that note, I'd want to thank you for taking your time to join this podcast, to be interviewed. It's been fascinating. I've reflected, I've learned a lot, as I always do on this podcast, and I'm sure that our listeners would have learned a lot from you. Thank you again for all our listeners. Please follow the podcast and share widely. You may change somebody's life just by sharing the podcast and listening to the experience of other people like Professor Ged Williams today. So share, follow, and like. And I look forward to welcoming you again on our future podcasts, which will be published in a few weeks. Once more, thank you, Professor Ged Williams, for joining us today. And to all our listeners, see you on our next episode. Thank you.